Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Jew Want to Know podcast. It's your host, Margarita, and today I am bringing you a fascinating episode with the last Jewish gangster, Myron Sugerman. Born in Newark, New Jersey, Myron is a Jewish gangster and son of Barney, or Sugi Sugerman. Both Barney and Myron worked in the coin-operated amusements business, and what I'm referring to is the selling of slot machines, jukeboxes, cigarette machines, and anything else that accepted coins. These kinds of machines were typically found in bars and nightclubs, and in some instances, what Barney and Myron engaged in was considered illegal gambling. Myron sold these machines all over the world and did business with some of the most dangerous individuals known to the public. I'm talking about members of the Genovese and Gambino crime families, as well as the Cali cartel, among others. Myron also lived all over the world and speaks numerous languages. I did ask him if he spoke Russian, and although he said no, he was able to tell me a couple of swear words he learned while in prison. Myron was in prison for 19 months during 1995 and 1996, and as you'll hear him say, what he was in prison for ultimately is considered legal now in today's day and age. I do want to come back to Myron's father, Sugi, for a minute to help you understand the generation he was part of and how iconic a legacy he left. Sugi was part of the New Jersey Jewish mob and was involved with famous Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and Abner Longy Zwillman, who was known at the time as the Al Capone of New Jersey. There's actually an interesting book about these Jewish gangsters. I think it's called Tough Jews, and it explains who they were, the crimes they committed, how the gangs operated, etc. These gangsters came out of a generation of Jews that witnessed both World War I and World War II. And they didn't want to be considered weak Jews ever again. We have a lot to learn about Jewish pride from the stories of these people. For example, Myron will discuss this in greater detail in the episode, but the Jewish mafia had a lot to do with helping with the founding of the State of Israel. Specifically, they helped Israel receive weapons when the U.S. forbade it with Truman's Neutrality Act. Myron also discusses his work with Simon Wiesenthal, a famous Nazi hunter who helped catch Dr. Joseph Mengele. All that is to say that the Jewish mafia in New York, New Jersey, they did a tremendous amount for Jewish people at large. Prior to the release of this episode, I actually got to meet Myron in person. We went out for dinner with some of his gangster friends. Now, I can't tell you how it went down, but what I can say is there is still such a thing as a Jewish mafia. It may not operate as it did before, but there are people out there who are doing this type of work, and they even have organized efforts to combat antisemitism in the U.S. specifically. Even so, in speaking to Myron, I could hear his concern over the fact that many Jews are not proud today. They're not proud and not willing to defend themselves because their fear is stronger than their desire to fight back. Now, no one likes violence. Violence is not the aspiration, but in the face of an attack, knowing how to defend yourself is crucial. And if you remember, that's actually why I brought Hanan Smith on to talk about self-defense. And his episode is still one of the most listened to on the podcast. As Hanan said, if it's between me or you, it's always going to be me. And I can hear this sentiment echoed by Myron as well. Having a chance to meet Myron and his friends, experience the mafia vibe, if you will, it's something I will remember for the rest of my life. I'm so glad I have the opportunity to capture Myron's story. I'll mention that he has a great documentary on Amazon Prime. It's called Last Man Standing, The Chronicles of Myron Sugerman. He also has a book titled The Chronicles of the Last Jewish Gangster, From Meyer to Myron. Myron and I actually share the same Hebrew name. He is Meyer or Meyer, depending on how you pronounce it, and I am Meira. These names mean to give light or to illuminate. In meeting Myron, I thought that was a neat coincidence, or perhaps it was no coincidence at all. Please enjoy this episode. Welcome to People Jew Want to Know podcast, Myron. How are you today?
I'm just fine after that exercise of learning how to get on a Zoom. All right?
Yeah, death by technology. Okay, so it's a huge privilege to have you on. I'm very excited to chat. It's no secret, your bio is well documented online. You've got a documentary, even a book. Your story is nothing short of iconic. So can you take us beyond your bio? Now that you're reflecting on your life, are there any details that you can fill in that people may not know about you on the surface?
I'm lovable. I'm charming. I'm a bit of a rascal, a bit of a scoundrel. I probably broke quite a few of man's laws. and try to break a couple of natural laws, but I didn't succeed as far as the natural laws are concerned. And I wasn't always successful in breaking man's laws, which I have, which for the most part are hypocritical, honey. All right. And so it's a way of controlling human beings. Somebody like myself who's lived outside the law is a bit of a rebel, or a bit of a revolutionary, and thinking outside of the box and not being constrained and restricted to man's law. Although, in reality, to a certain extent, without man's law, there would be absolute chaos, more than chaos. All right. So that's what I could tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit of my philosophy. I lived a very exciting kind of a life, a very adventurous life, been all over the world. When I was 34 years of age, I found myself being ignorant as far as Judaism is concerned. Yes, I studied Zionism, proud Jew, but knew nothing of the Jewish religion. And so when at the age of 34, I took it upon myself to start self-educating myself on the Jewish religion for all aspects from A to Z, from the time that Moses received Torah on Mount Sinai and gave it to the Jewish people, or to what the people were at that time were known either as ex-slaves, Hebrew slaves, or Israelites. And then I became immersed in it, in the study of it. And it was a balance in terms of, it gave me equilibrium and balance in terms of a life that was living outside the law, like the Wild West, and at the same time an anchor insofar as moral decisions are concerned. Okay, so go ahead, shoot with your questions.
Great. And for those who are not familiar, can you talk about exactly what you did that might be considered outside of man's law?
So all my life, I was in the gambling machine business, and I would say virtually the vast majority, maybe 85, 90% of that activity was outside of the law itself, which, again, is hypocritical because in 1995, I was sentenced to prison. I spent 19 months in prison for crimes of operating illegal gambling, and yet, young lady, if you go on your television set and watch the advertisement for playing gambling machines online, you're actually playing the same games that I went to jail for 19 months. So that's one of the laws that I was explaining before are hypocritical and man's laws. The powers to be taken away are, first of all, the outlaws create it, and then ultimately the bigger outlaw, the government, comes in, takes it away for their own benefit, which that's just the law of survival. Always the question, which fish eat the small fish? The big fish obviously eat the small fish. And that's a reality as far as life is concerned. And one who engages in that kind of an illegal activity needs to be a bit philosophical about it, because you know in which ocean that you're decided to swim.
Yeah, makes sense. And you do a lot of speaking engagements now, and you'll travel and speak, and you spoke at great length in your documentary about your life, but I haven't heard you speak on your time in prison. What was that experience like? Did you meet a lot of people?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. It's a vacation.
It was actually a break from the hectic life. I was there for 19 months, read books, conversed with some very, very interesting guys, played a lot of sports, got myself into excellent physical condition and mental condition. Although when you're incarcerated in any form of a prison and you're restricted in your movement and so forth, you can't expect to come out of it. Even if you're in it for just one day, you're not going to be the same person after as you were the person that was when you entered. So after 19 months, there's no such thing as correction or rehabilitation. That's pure nonsense. Of course, everybody that goes there, all you're hearing about are fellas who were caught in their criminal activity, and most of them make excuses for being there. And it's actually a social laboratory for criminals to improve as far as their criminal actions are concerned. But as far as my 19 months, as I explained to you, intellectually, it was a good experience. And it's like anything else on the face of this earth. It's what you make of your circumstances. Right?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And How old were you when you went?
56, and
Okay,
came out, I was close to 58. Yeah.
got it. Okay. And actually, you don't know because I haven't told you this yet, but I'm from a very big mafia town in Ukraine, like one of the most criminal towns in all of Ukraine. It's a city called Donetsk, very close to the Russian border, that's now
Right.
considered an occupied territory. And
Right.
there, the town, its historic origin during the Soviet Union and even prior, is a coal miner town. So nobody wanted to live there because all there is to do for work is work in the coal mines, which are dirty and the air is polluted. And so the people that ended up living in Donetsk were people who worked in the mines, which were typically former convicts, and then Jews, because the Soviet Union wanted to move the Jews somewhere outside of regular society. And so Donetsk as a city became this very interesting blend of, first it was blue collar crime, then it was white collar crime. And the way that people think about life there is very much outside of man's law. It's really, they have a different moral code by which they live by. So I really empathize with what you're saying because it's very much ingrained into my upbringing and childhood that people have a different philosophy on life. In today's generation, especially the young generation of Americans, I don't think they necessarily understand this nuance because they're not made aware of it. They don't grow up in an environment where they see the distinction between some kind of ethics versus what man's law is. And this naturally raises the question for me, what do you think today's generation of young Jews can learn from Jewish gangsters?
Very good analysis. Coal mining towns, like, for example, Scranton, Pennsylvania, getting back to that situation, was in its heyday. So while coal was being produced here in the United States, so Scranton, Pennsylvania was one of the wealthiest places, believe it or not, in the United States. Today, it's what they call a rust city, where it's down and dirty and so forth. But in its heyday, it was an active place. It was a jumping jive. The whole area had nothing but bars, saloons, gambling, prostitution, the whole shebang. Getting onto your question, so I have a belief that the mindset of a Jewish gangster, and also non-Jewish, in a certain way, a real gangster sees himself as a Robin Hood. He sees himself as not somebody to bully. You don't bully people. You protect the people that need to be protected. All right. You have an obligation. You have a civic obligation to protect your domain. And if somebody is respectful, there's mutual respect. But let's move on to the question of what I want to talk about, the mindset of a gangster and the mindset of a patriot where it concerns Jews. Meaning that a patriot, pre-state Israel, Palestine, the year before the creation of the state of Israel, those patriots were either born or raised in the United States, in all probability, the same mindset, they would have been gangsters. Vice versa, the gangster that was born and raised in the United States, had he been transferred by circumstances of birth, born and raised in Palestine, pre-state Israel, he would have been a patriot. Now, what do I mean by that? If you take a study as far as the history of the Jewish gangster in the United States, he felt an absolute great sense of pride to do what he could in terms of supplying weapons and arms to both Irgun and the Haganah during the struggle for the elimination, for the cancellation of the mandate and for the creation of the state of Israel. All right. And the patriot in Palestine, Menachem Begin, Yair Stern, Yitzhak Shamir, Barzani, Feinstein, all of these men, they destroyed British assets, stole their weapons, robbed their banks, destroyed their post offices, so that in the case of Lehi, which was the offshoot of the Irgun, they weren't known as the Lehi by the British. They called them the Stern Gang for gangsters. So again, the question of the importance of the Jewish gangster, study it. At the same time, you need to study the history of Zionism and how the Zionist struggle involved an awful lot of so-called violence in order to expel the British from Palestine, in order to make the possibility of creating the Jewish state. So as far as the kids are concerned today, the kids, the yeshivas, they're not doing a good enough job to inspire courage and pride and manlyhood. And so far as Jewish kids are concerned, that's it. On the other hand, you take a look at these kids in Israel, these kids are terrific. It's really one of the greatest of its generations. I am just absolutely blown away by these young kids who were brats on October the 6th. And today, they're men of superior character and quality. These are kids that I'm meeting now that are coming to the United States, that a lot of them in Mar Chabad in West Orange, New Jersey. They're terrific kids. I mean, great guys. Now, one of the things that I've always said is that one of the consequences, negative consequences of the Vietnam War was the pressure brought to bear upon Nixon to cancel conscription, the draft. Once they killed the draft, they took away the opportunity for kids to become men and to learn patriotism in the United States. Israel has the draft, has conscription. And so it takes these kids, all right, and they remanufacture them, or they manufacture men. And that's extremely important. Our kids today, as far as the United States is concerned, even including the yeshiva, some of these yeshiva kids, I'm not impressed with the idea of just Torah and Talmud. Without the combination of physical strength, which gives somebody a completely different, you walk differently, you talk differently, the way you carry yourself is completely different as opposed to yeshiva kids that don't even know how to properly shake hands with a human being. You look them in the eye and say to them, it's nice to meet you, and really convey a spirit of sincerity.
It's interesting. I think just recently I read on the news that they're going to overturn the law in Israel that allows observant Jews not to serve in the IDF, the men. I think they're going to force everybody to serve, and the Orthodox loophole won't work anymore.
They're talking about the Haredi. They're talking about the extreme,
the ultra-Orthodox.
They're living in the 16th and 17th century. I'm wondering to what extent they could be useful. Of course, I would love to see it. I'd love to see them in the military. By the way, they can make also an invaluable contribution to the kids coming from secular world to also at the same time meet kids that know Torah and know Talmud, which is the basis of Judaism. You cannot be, one of the things I say, yes, you can be an Israeli, you're a Jew, but you're an Israeli and without the knowledge as far as Judaism is concerned. If we're going to move forward into the next generation and until the next generation and the following generation, until we reach the tail end of eternity, you cannot have Jews without Judaism. That's an absolute truth.
And you touched on this slightly. You talked about the influence that the Jewish mafia had in the founding of the State of Israel and how they helped the Israeli government win the war and the founding of the state. Can you shed more light? What was that experience like? Because you lived through that. It's a historic moment.
Well, I didn't actually live through it. It was my parents' generation, but I lived through it through my father.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, the Jewish gangster, during the 1930s, we had a rising tide of anti-Semitism brought to the United States by Nazis, by Germans. Actual Germans came from particularly after World War I, of the defeat of the Kaiser Wilhelm and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the German Empire. Right? So you had a large immigration of Germans, as well as a rising tide of anti-Semitism caused by the stock market collapse of 1928 and then the Depression in 1932. And so you understand that economics are poor. Suddenly, the Jews are blamed. So Newark, New Jersey was the principal battleground in the United States because we had a large Jewish community and we had a large German community. The German community, going all the way back to the 1820s, 1830s, there was a large immigration of Germans that came to Newark, New Jersey, both Jews and non-Jews. The non-Jews were beer manufacturers. We had one time 19 breweries in Newark, New Jersey. The water was very good, particularly for beer manufacturing. And so the Nazi movement was imported by somebody in the name of Fritz Kuhn, and he started what was known as the American Nazi Party. And with the beginning of the American Nazi Party began also at the same time Jews being beat up and so forth. Well, that's where the gangsters, under the leadership of the mob boss of New Jersey, was named Abner Longy Zwillman, who was known as the Al Capone of the state of New Jersey. He gave his blessing for the organization that is known as the Minutemen in honor of the men of the American Revolutionary War, who in a minute's notice were available to go fight the American Nazis. And that was a continual struggle throughout the entire 1930s until 1941, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and 2 days later, the Axis responded by declaring war in the United States, and that ended the German rule. But the Jewish mob under Meyer Lansky cooperated with the Department of Navy during World War II, provide eyes and ears through the longshoremen to prevent against sabotage by Nazi spies during World War II. And then after the war, it was David Ben-Gurion, who was the provisional head of the Jewish state, was preparing for the declaration of a state after expelling the British from the Mandate. And so we needed weapons and arms. He was the head of Haganah, and he reached out to friends throughout the United States. There was a major, major campaign, both legitimate businessmen, whatever that expression means, and gangsters, to supply weapons and arms to both Haganah and to the Irgun. They did a massive job. There was a law called the Neutrality Act that President Truman, even though he recognized the state of Israel November 29th, 1947, when Ben-Gurion declared the state of Israel on May 14th, 1948, shortly afterwards, Truman invoked what was known as the Neutrality Act of 1939, making it a criminal activity to supply weapons and arms to Palestine, either to Jews or Arabs. So it depended upon huge cooperation of businessmen and gangsters and everybody to supply weapons and arms to both the Irgun and the Haganah. It was a successful operation. One of the most outrageous decisions of history, of course, is the unbelievable decision to go ahead and declare the state of Israel when all they had was sticks and stones to fight the Arabs. The supply of weaponry was a major, major factor in helping the creation of the state of Israel.
It's also a great example of the difference between man's law and what we consider not man's law. We could say God's law, ethical law, however we want to put it. It's a great example of when the right thing to do might be illegal. Okay, well, I guess I have a comment before I have my next question. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the modern Jews. I thought you might find it interesting. The patriotism that you're talking about and the importance of strong Jews, we don't feel it today. There's a lot of resentment from young people towards the government and definitely in Jews towards the state of Israel. We're seeing people become proud Jews today again, but I think before October 7th, there were a lot of Jews that were indifferent. There is one, I don't know if organization is the right word, or group that is trying to quote unquote fight back, and they're called Jew Hate Database, and they run an Instagram account, and the whole point of that Instagram account is to expose anti-Semites. So whenever there are protests or rallies and there are those people that, spit on Jews or come up and say something horrible or God forbid try to attack Jews, they have people that capture it on video and post it publicly on the internet for everyone to see. And there are instances where the news picks it up, the media. There are instances when the law enforcement partners with them to then go and catch those people. It's a big deal what they're doing, and they're publicly shaming these open anti-Semites. And that's probably the best example I've seen of my generation's Jews actually trying to go and fight back without violence or in some clever way. The world has changed, right? Now, the way to get things done is to publicly expose to the masses, for better or for worse, right? In the past, you could kind of handle things on your own, which is how people did it. Now it doesn't work that way. As you think about your life, what do you think you've learned about risk?
Sometimes you got to go for broke. There are times when you got to go for broke. And, we all enjoy comforts. We all enjoy security. We all enjoy financial security. And everybody, of course, oftentimes people just get carried away with materialism, and it's all that they'll wind up talking about, or how they'll rate somebody or judge them on the basis of that, and so forth and so forth. So the question of living according to one's principle, it's not an easy proposition. It's painful. It's sometimes extremely painful. The Jews in the United States Jews are Jews. They're highly intelligent. They're very motivated. They become very successful. We're amazing. We're an amazing people, in spite of the fact that we're 0.000001 of the entire world population. We've dominated 22% of the Nobel Prizes. We're exceptional people. Now that raises, of course, the question, if you were to ask me what do I think as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, and I have no problem, as far as politics is concerned, and where Chabad asks me not to discuss politics when giving a speech. Right now, I'm not giving a speech, so I can go ahead and tell you what I believe. The reason that the rabbis don't want me to give a speech is because the basic idea, the concept of Chabad, is to bring them in and not to chase them out. Hopefully that one day they'll start to see things the way Chabad sees them. They really see them. But in the meantime, they're very careful not to get involved in politics, because the concept of Chabad is bring them in Jew by Jew. But Mr. Sugerman, I don't have that particular. I'm not a rabbi of Chabad. I'm a great follower of the Rebbe, but I have to tell you the truth. The 80% Jews of the United States, and I tell them oftentimes, fella, listen, there's 19 prayers that we recite every day, 3 times a day. An Orthodox Jew prays and recites the Shemona Esrei, what's known as the 18, but actually it's 19 prayers. It's also known as the Amida. It's the essence of the Jewish prayer 3 times a day. And the 19th prayer was created, I'm thinking, about 6 centuries after the 18 prayers, different prayers were concluded, were codified. So on the 19th prayer, in the time of the Romans, there were a lot of Jews that were ratting out other Jews to the Roman authorities. So a rabbi was asked at that time to make a prayer to God, and it's called La Malshinim. That means the informers. We ask God to extricate, terminate, eliminate, annihilate all the rats. All right? Now, a rat is what? A rat is a traitor. So you take, for example, the Obama-Biden government, 100% anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. No matter what crap that they tried to use to disguise their Jew hatred, unfortunately, they can't do that. They can't get over on me. It's obvious that when the government supports Iran, the enemy of both the United States and particularly Israel, with intentions to create a nuclear bomb, how can a Jew in his right mind? All right, now, you have 80% of the Jews of the United States that vote not in favor today of Biden. They voted definitely in favor of Obama. In the meantime, he was nothing but a Morisco Muslim who favored Iran, favored the Egyptians, favored the Muslim Brotherhood, all the rest of that stuff, and hated our Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. All right. What do we do with Jewish people like this? What do we do with the 80% of the people? Now, people are calling me up because I'm known for my very, very extreme, but absolutely impossible to argue against me, because everything that I'm saying is perfect truth. When I say that 19th prayer, you're praying for God to eliminate you because you're voting for the enemy. That means that you're a traitor. What does it say here in the Shemona Esrei? La Malshinim, the informers, the rats, the traitors, the betrayers, the collaborators. Okay, so getting to the conclusion. The conclusion is you got 80% of these people, they're watered down, diluted, and so forth. Again, today, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, his position is that he's been an incredible friend of the state of Israel.
I got to ask real quick a question of vital importance. What is a Morisco Muslim?
So that a Morisco Muslim, very good. A Morisco Muslim is like a Marrano. It's somebody who pretends to be a Christian, but in reality, he's still a Muslim. This was a term that was applied during the time of the Iberian Peninsula. But you asked me a question earlier. Is there something that people should know? Yeah. I was very close with Simon Wiesenthal. I was extremely close with him. I was his man. When I was a kid, I was in Vienna, Austria. I must have been 25, 26. And my wife is from Argentina, Jewish girl from Polish Jews from Argentina. And at that time, they had 1960 or 61, they discovered Eichmann in Argentina. And of course, Wiesenthal became well known because supposedly, allegedly, although it was disputed by others, he was the one that was able to trace Eichmann to Buenos Aires. And then Mossad came in, took over. Isser Harel, who at that time was the head of Mossad, he was responsible for the capture of Eichmann and bringing him to Israel for trial. And it was a great story. I heard about Wiesenthal. I'm in Vienna. I had a friend, a Hungarian Jew, Joseph Remini. I said, how do I find this Simon Wiesenthal? He put me in a cab. I went, I introduced myself, knocked on the door, met him, introduced myself, and I became very close. He said, where are you coming from? I said, from America. He says, did you have family that was killed in the Holocaust? Nobody. I'm an American. My father was American. He was born in North New Jersey, 1900. We had no connection as far as Europe was concerned. My wife, yes, she had all her family that was wiped out, but she never knew her family from Europe. Her family spread. Those that survived went all over the world to different places. But I attached myself to Wiesenthal and helped him as far as pursuit of Nazi war criminals. I speak a lot of languages. I am very people person. I'm very charming. When I have to be charming, I could charm snakes if I had to charm anyone. And I would go for South America for business and my gambling machine business. Wiesenthal liked me because I was street. I was both street and college educated. And he would use me for certain messages to be delivered to certain people and information in turn to be extracted from people to be sent to him and so forth. And he was particularly concerned if we could find some information or some sighting of Mengele, Joseph Mengele in Paraguay. Right? So he was a great guy. He was a fantastic education. To have that kind of a relationship was father-son. All right. And again, every Jew should do everything within his or her power to do something for the Jewish people, for the Jewish nation. Those are things which are extremely important and adds value and makes you significant, makes you relevant, makes you lived. I used to have an old gangster. That was my guy, an Italian old Neapolitan from Patterson, New Jersey, Louis. They called him Louis Red. And I used to meet him once a week for years and years and years. We'd sit and whatever business needed we talked about. But most of the time, 90%, 95% of it, we talk philosophy. And he used to say to me like this, everything but principle leaves this earth. Meaning you don't take a damn thing with you. What you leave behind is wisdom. If this podcast that you and I are having right now, if I might have said something wise during this particular podcast, and it's left behind for others to learn from, then I lived. Then people will know that I lived when I'm long gone, because they will pass on words of wisdom that were told to me, that I'm telling to you, that you're sharing with your audience. And that's what life is all about. At the tail end, King Solomon said, Hevel Hevelim, Kol Hevel. Vanity of vanities, it's all in vain. Meaning, all of the possessions, all the wealth, all the women, all the wives that he had, all the concubines, for naught. The only thing that counted were the words of wisdom. Now that's coming from an outlaw.
Yeah, the concept of legacy is very important and also just big in, I think, Jewish faith. On the flip side of that, though, as you look back on your life, do you think there's anything you'd do differently?
A lot of stuff. Of course, I would love to have a rerun. Knowing what I know today, of course, there's an awful lot that I would do differently. But in the final analysis, that opportunity doesn't exist. We get to the tail end, and yes, there are all kinds of regrets. I wish I could have done this. I should have done this. So forth and so on. We live with our regrets. It's only normal. It's only natural. It's only human. On the other hand, we tried to put it into perspective on a balance sheet. I also did an awful lot of good. I did some things that I wish I didn't do. And on the other hand, there's things that I did which were meritorious. And that's with any human being. I have a friend, very close friend, and he's the example of a human being that lives with the greatest amount of regrets beyond belief. In reality, by the rules of the outlaws, I'm really not supposed to be friendly with this fellow. Why? Because he put on a wire and he cooperated with the government in order to save himself from 200 years in prison. He lives with torture that you can't possibly imagine. And it's painful to listen how he chokes on the fact that he betrayed the oath. I was in prison with a couple of guys that I grew up that were younger than me, that I remember when they were kids. And they were facing 25 years in prison. And of course, they were given the opportunity to cooperate, and they didn't. They did the full stretch. To bite the bullet, it's, or not to bite the bullet, it's an incredible challenge. It's beyond understanding. All right. So any other questions, honey? Ask them all.
My theory on gangsters is they're people who are more tolerant to risk. But when you look at your father's generation, there was always like a changing of the guards. Like one day someone could get shot outside of the bar and all of a sudden then they don't lead anything anymore. It's somebody else that now stepped in. And there were all of these unspoken rules about who has the power, who's in control, who's the head honcho. So I wonder, how did people retain the power in the circle, and what did it take to stay on top?
That's interesting. The friend that I was mentioning before is highly intellectual. He's very brilliant. Unfortunately, besides living with his torture, intellectually he is very observant, very profound in his thinking and so forth. And we come to the conclusion that there's one gangster, there was one mob boss in particular. He was an unwilling boss. He didn't want to become. It was forced on him because he was exceptional. But he knew that it was preferred not to be, because he understood the consequences of being a mob boss ultimately would end up in either being imprisoned or being killed. And in actual fact, he did 7 years in prison for refusal to testify at a grand jury after he was given immunity. And he refused to speak, refused to talk, and it took 7 years before they finally released him. But being a leader, whatever it is, whatever the organization is, leadership is something that, particularly in the mob, you have to think a million different ways, upside, downside, right side, left side, before you go ahead and to make a decision, understanding the consequences of what that decision that you're going to make. And there is when you talk about regrets. I made decisions as far as life is concerned that truthfully, I regret. I regret given the opportunity to do it again. I would have done it differently. But wisdom, none of us come out of our mother's stomachs with wisdom. We all have to experience life and to be able to acquire, absolve, digest, process.
How did you ultimately get out of gangster life? Because if I recall correctly from your documentary, it wasn't just when you had gone to prison. You had kind of trailed off from doing it years before, but the law enforcement was using that time to build a case against you. So how did you ultimately get out? Because that's one of the hard things, is once you get in, it's not very clean to get out.
That's a very good question. I think the answer, for each person, it's different. For each person, it's different. If a guy is broke, he comes out of prison, he's broke, who the hell cares about him? Who cares about that guy? All right? He might as well go to McDonald's and flip hamburgers. He's really opted out. He's of no use. On the other hand, if a guy comes out, he's using prison as the ending. So he comes out of prison and he goes right back into action. All right. You're back in the ball game. The question of organized crime it's a discipline. There's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations and so forth, a lot of traditions, there's just an awful lot of, I would say, strict rules and regulations. Let's say, for example, if a guy didn't go to jail, but he wants to retire. Probably has to go travel to some other country and not to be drawn back into it. But today, it's not the same mafia that it was going back 40 years ago. It's changed radically. Of course, it's still in existence. It'll always be. There's a need for it.
You're saying there's a mafia today of Jews?
There are Jews that I'm the tail end of an old world. Margarita, I'm the tail end of my father's world that started in the 1900s. That world ends with me. So when somebody says the name of your book is The Last Jewish Gangster from Meyer to Myron, in reality, I'm the caboose of that world. Now, that doesn't have anything to do, let's say, with the Jews, the Russian Jews that are gangsters, or talk about the Sephardim in Israel that are gangsters, or wherever, Ukrainian, Russian, East European, whatever the case may be. So the Italian mafia was the stronghold. Even your Russians, when they came to the United States, whatever they did insofar as the gasoline business was concerned, they still answered to the Italians. The Italians were the superstructure and the superpower. Whether it was Greeks, the only ones that the Italians, I don't know if they dominated them. What happened is that the new generation of the Italians probably just didn't have the same force and power dealing with the Albanians. So when the Albanians came, they were the new boys on the block. They were perhaps a little bit hungrier, tougher. When you're coming from nothing, you got nothing to lose. You're ready to risk. But if you got something, you're not so ready to risk.
That's a great way to capture, I think, Ukrainian people as well. And the war we see in Ukraine today, that's the reason they keep fighting, is because they really have nothing to lose. That is for sure.
I think as far as that war is concerned, that's a war all about business. That's a war that should never have happened. If Trump was the president of the United States, as a mob boss, and Putin as a mob boss, they sit down, and Trump says to Putin, where are you going with this? You're going to embarrass me. All right? You tell me what your problem is with this kid from Ukraine. I'll talk to the kid, then all three of us will sit down. We'll find some kind of a solution. This is the way mob bosses function. That's why that's why there's a need for them. There's a purpose to it. Trump is a mob boss. He understands mob mentality. He understands the role of a mob leader. He would sit down with Putin and say to him, Vladimir, what the hell's the matter with you? What's your problem today? And then he would say to Zelensky, are you nuts? Are you crazy? This guy's got 6,500 nuclear bombs, and he's crazy. What do you want to do? You want to kill off all the people of the Ukraine? And don't forget you're a Jew. When the tail end of it, when after these Ukrainians, they're going to total up all the number of people that are dead, killed, crippled, all the destruction. So all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, you remember Zelensky, his mother and father were Jewish. He was supposed to go to Israel. This is crazy. This is insanity. It should never have been allowed to happen. This is where you have absence of world leadership. Trump is a mob boss.
That is fascinating. I have never heard of him described this way, but I think that you're right. He is a mob boss, and the way that he handles conflict is different from what we've seen in the administration before. Comes, I think, also from the fact that he's a businessman. Like, in some sense, he knows how it operates behind the scenes in ways that other politicians in the past have not, because they've been politicians their whole career, where they have to be diplomatic and bureaucratic, and they don't see the gray.
Very, very good analysis, Margarita. My education was my father's partner, the one that I told you did 7 years prison for refusal. His name was Gerard Katina. He was the acting boss of the Genovese crime family. He was my father's partner in the jukebox and gaming business, going all the way back before World War II. He was Italian, but he was absolutely one of the greatest leaders of men that I've ever met. I observed him, I watched him, I studied him. He was absolutely brilliant. And that's the reason, he was self-educated. So in a million years, you would never know that this man was the mob boss he, together with guys like Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano and Doc Stacher and Longy Zwillman, they elevated. So these people were businessmen as well as mob bosses. If you broke the rules, you broke the laws, there were consequences. All right, and they acted them out. So watching this man all my life as a kid growing up, I understand Trump immediately is a mob boss. And he did business with the mob. You couldn't be in construction and real estate and so forth, labor unions, all these things that you negotiate. So you're absolutely right. He's a businessman. He's a mob boss. He never would have allowed this war. And there wouldn't have been an invasion as far as Gaza was concerned if Trump was the president, because he canceled Iran in terms of the Obama nuclear. And at the same time, he was imposing punishing sanctions on Iran. You would have had regime change. Without Iran, there's no such thing as Hezbollah and Houthis and Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and all these other dunks that run around, doing terrorism. Trump was great. You didn't have any wars. He went to North Korea to see that fat little Korean, right? And he talked to him a little bit, put his arm around him, charmed him. Tell him, pal, it's okay, it's all right. Take it easy, slow down. All right, you're a mob boss, I'm a mob boss. I'm showing you respect. You have to, in turn, you owe me respect. You can't embarrass me. I came all the way from America to North Korea to legitimatize you. Don't you ever stick a knife in my back. Do we understand each other?
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how the election plays out. And as we wrap here, how can people connect with you and learn more about your work?
Anybody that wants to get in touch with me, my email address is charming@eclipse.net. They can find me on Facebook. I don't go on Facebook. I don't know how to use Facebook. They set up a million different Facebooks, and I don't know what the hell it's all about. Then they can contact me, charming@eclipse.net. There's a movie about me. It's called Last Man Standing. It's on Amazon. It's good. They did a great job. The documentary is great. The book is great. It's called the Chronicles of the Last Jewish Gangster, from Meyer to Myron. And I don't like to sell it on Amazon. I like to speak to the people, tell them about myself, tell them, answer any questions that they have, and send them an autographed book. They buy a book and so forth. I just enjoy talking to people interested, like yourself. These are fantastic questions. You asked great questions. This is one of the greatest of all the interviews. I'm being 100% sincere, young lady. The questions you ask are very, very profound. And hopefully the people that are going to be watching whatever you're going to put on your video are going to learn wisdom as a result of all of this.
I hope so too. I got one last question for you, Myron. It's an easy one. It's one that I ask every single guest. Who would you like to nominate for the podcast? This could be somebody that's living, or it could be a historical figure.
Okay, Zemmer Mizrahi. He's a retired officer in the IDF. Absolutely brilliant. Great guy.
Thank you so much for this nomination, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I learned a lot, and this is just the beginning.
So they tell you that the one who teaches is the one who learns.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Jew Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram @People Jew Want to Know.